It is Saturday night, so it is time to ride because we're live. Welcome to this episode of the A to G Lifestyle Show now, because we're not just a podcast. I realize I've been referring to it as a podcast, even though it's really now just a show with a podcast element included. But how are we doing, gentlemen?
Doing good.
Yeah,
How about you guys?
Yeah. We got some exciting topics to get into this Saturday evening. But before we do, obviously, if you don't follow us anywhere else besides YouTube or Twitch, go ahead and follow us on all the social medias except for Facebook, because we're anti-Facebook for some reason. We're just not that old, I guess. But you can go follow us on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at AG Lifestyle Pod if you haven't done that already. But other than that, I think let's hop right into it. But before we do, I actually do have a new way I'd like to start the show. So I didn't tell them this, by the way. I didn't tell them this beforehand, but I have a question I'm going to start asking us before all of our shows begin. So I figured, since we are the A to G Lifestyle Podcast, and that stands for always becoming confident, disciplined, effective, efficient, focused gentlemen, I figure that before every episode, I will ask you, fine gentlemen, what is a moment from the last week that you are proud of yourself about, where you felt like you exhibited some form of confidence, discipline, etc. So, Andreas, do you have an A to G lifestyle moment from the last week?
Well, I wasn't really expecting this question right now, because I got to figure out what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say, because I'm not allowed to talk.
You find him unprepared, but I think we got him, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'm not allowed to talk about my work online.
So yeah, that's true.
So, I don't know. Give me like 2 minutes and I'll get back to you, because I got to think of something non-work related that I can talk about, because I got that already very fancy social media gag to talk about what I do.
Yeah. All right, I got you, Gavin.
I think, Chris, you should start us off with an example of your week.
Oh, man. When I was planning to ask that and spring that question on you guys, I was honestly not expecting to get that turned back on me. But let me see. Confidence, discipline, efficiency, effectiveness, or focus. I think for me personally, my A to G lifestyle moment from the last week was probably experiencing a sort of focus as it pertains to studying scripture, I guess. So I'm over the last week, I've been more focused at understanding and digging into contextually whatever I'm reading in whatever part of scripture that is. So I guess recently it's been a lot of Job and Genesis. So I've been very pleased at my ability to remain focused when it's very easy to get distracted while reading, especially in the morning. So I think for me, it's probably going to be that area of focus over the last week.
Yeah, I think I'll add on to that. I think that'll be my A to G lifestyle moment too. I gotta read the Bible in a book, our year in a book, and it's just kind of asking like where do you think God's speaking to you? And it's like, it usually takes me like 2 hours to figure out all the questions that book asks, and normally I get really distracted in it. Like the last week, I've been super distracted while reading it. So, but this week I have definitely been more focused and been more efficient in what I'm doing my research on scripturally.
There we go. Okay.
That's good.
I
guess one thing I did is that I started and finished that book by Peter Zahan or whatever. The guy that was going viral on Joe Rogan this week. So I saw those clips and I finished that book in 2 days. And now I have a better knowledge and better working understanding of what he believes is going on in the world. And I can better communicate that and put a Christian perspective on how we should respond to that based on understanding his work. I've only read the book once, right? There's no way I could have read it twice in 2 days. So I have a cursory level understanding of what everybody's all hyped about on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. That's good. Those are both good ones, actually. Those are solid, especially considering you weren't prepared to answer that. So I'm very pleased as your fellow co-host and COO that the operation is flowing smoothly while I'm prepared. Yeah, let's hop into it. I mean, why not? First off, we do have to recognize, again, the tragedy that unfortunately occurred this episode, in that Andreas is not wearing the cowboy hat because we opted to have him wear the cleaner sounding headset in favor of the stylish thing that is his cowboy hat. It's felt, right?
Yeah, it is felt. It's
Okay.
it's buffalo felt.
Buffalo felt.
So that's pretty good. It's 4 X's for people that want to know what that means. For just understanding.
Yeah. 4X's, a whole 4X's. I didn't know what that meant until he explained it to me, and he explained it to me a while ago, so I no longer know what it means. All I know is that it's really high quality.
So good. For those who care. For those who care, they'll know what it means.
So the homies. It's for the homies. Yeah, makes sense. It's an inside thing. Fair enough.
Yep.
Alrighty. Well, are we ready to hop into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's hop right on in then. So, over the last week, there was a very interesting development that occurred, and it had to do with the president of the United States, Joseph R. Biden. So on November 2nd of 2022, several documents marked classified were found in President Biden's office that he used between the years 2017 and 2020, a few years after he had wrapped up his stint as President Obama's vice president. Then a few additional classified documents were found on December 20th, 2022, in the garage of his Delaware residence, him being President Biden, of course. And when pressed about this, I think earlier in the week, Biden seemed quite surprised that there would be classified documents on his property or in his residences or his offices. I think he reacted rather by saying that, quote, he was surprised to learn that there were any government records that were taken to that office when pertaining to the documents that were found in the office. And then pertaining to the ones that were found in his garage, he responded by saying, "My Corvette's in a locked garage. Okay." So very, very comical responses there. But it's important that we understand the issue here, because obviously this sparked a lot of comparison to the investigation that went into former President Donald Trump in a very similar situation where classified documents were found at his residence in Mar-a-Lago. But there are a few differences that we do have to note off the bat. First off, there are different levels of classifications of documents. So documents that are classified by default does not mean that whoever's in possession of them shouldn't have them. It just means that you need a certain level of clearance to have them. So that's really what we need to assess when we're looking at this. The different levels of classifications, for those of you who don't know, by the way, are I believe there are 3. It's confidential, secret, and top secret. And it's important that we know that we don't yet know the classifications of the documents that were found on any of those residences or in the garage or the office. But nonetheless, the typical rules that govern the keeping of classified documents usually consist of documents that are marked classified being handled carefully and must be housed in what's called sensitive compartmented information facilities, or SCIFs, which have appropriate controls to ensure security. And it is important that we note that a locked closet or a garage would not qualify as an SCIF. And like I said, this differs from President Trump's situation because unlike Biden's current circumstance, back in May 2021, apparently the archives reached out to President Trump and his team about missing documents or documents that were missing. They requested them back. President Trump declined to return them. And had he returned the documents, that probably would have ended the matter. But instead, he resisted, and the investigation into the documents that he took, the ones that were found at Mar-a-Lago, was conducted, and it was made public 9 months after the initial inquiry. So with that said, I'm interested to see what the rest of the panel has to think about this situation, because obviously off the bat, most people probably think hypocrisy, right?
Yeah, it's absolute hypocrisy, right? Because they were, well, at least the mainstream media was saying that Trump should not be able to be president or seek office again next term because of the fact that he was storing these documents in an unsecured way in the Mar-a-Lago. And then we later find out that Joe Biden has done the exact same thing. And this isn't really just a rag on Joe Biden, but it seems that, it's a do what I say and not what I do kind of mentality. And President Trump, he had more authority than Biden did as VP, right? Because Trump was the president, Biden was the vice president. So it just on a basic level, right? All classifications run through the president there, and so he has the authority to to classify and unclassify documents. He has the ability to unclassify a document just by talking about it as president. I don't know if the vice president has that same ability and authority as the president did. So, so them saying that that Trump should not be able to be president because of his poor storage, and Biden should be, is Hippocratic to begin with. Gavin.
I just like because the big thing there is like drawing the comparisons between the two. And it's like it is obviously hypocrisy, you know. You can't be accusing someone of not being able to be president because they have documents and then you yourself having them. But it's there are differences in the case. Like in Mar-a-Lago, Trump had 160 documents reportedly and refused to give them over. But the Biden, his documents, he willingly turned them over. They were found on November 2nd, and the first press just really started kicking up like this week or a couple weeks ago. Nowhere near when, but we found out about this investigation when we were like the investigation started when the documents were found and turned over immediately. And it was also a small number of documents. But I just like it kind of scares me that there's just like he didn't know about them. How did they get in his garage if he did not know about them? What were they doing in a locked closet in his office if he didn't know about them? Either there's something else shifty going on behind the scenes, or dude's lying to us, and neither of those things are acceptable.
Yeah. Well, to amend something that Gavin said just a minute ago, when I was doing my research, I saw that several of the documents that Trump apparently have were just empty folders that were labeled with a classification status. So, and those counted towards the total number of documents they found. So, empty folders with no content inside of them were a classified document. So that doesn't really the reporting of the 100+ documents they found at Trump's abode at the Mar-a-Lago. I don't think is fully accurate reporting because of things like that. It's just a big number that they're trying to scare you with, right? And that's that's just what they do. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I did find an article that kind of mentioned it briefly. So the Washington Post, say what you will about the Washington Post, but they did do a brief summary of the issue with President Trump and the documents at Mar-a-Lago, the ones that were found there. Here's what they said. They said the FBI, in seeking a warrant to search Mar-a-Lago for more documents, said that boxes contained 184 documents with classification markings, 67 marked confidential, 92 marked secret, and 25 marked top secret. So I guess, unfortunately, since it seems like we can't really trust the media, we don't know if those documents that they found were like what you said, just mostly empty folders, or whether they were actual papers. It sounds like there were actual documents of some sort, right? We just don't know the balance between what was actually a document, what was not a document, what was he allowed to have that was a document, all the fun little details of the whole situation, right? So it's an interesting situation. But I guess we can get into why. So why do we think that in instances like this, because obviously the media is a big thing, and I do know Andreas likes to go after the media and talk about freedom of speech and such. So maybe you can chime in on this a little bit more too. But what is it? Why are we seeing just the trend in the media not just not reporting things accurately, but not even making it like subtle? Like they're just overtly going after people, and then when something similar happens to people that they support, there's like, I don't. Do you see something? I didn't see anything.
Well, I think that a big thing here that's going on is that that the media feels like they are the arbiter of truth, and they have a moral imperative to make sure what they want happens. And that's something that I think has been corrupting the media for quite a while. And so when they're going to report on a story or do something, they often have an agenda behind the story that they're going to report in order to push a goal that they think is good for the American people rather than present something unbiasedly. I was watching, a couple of years ago, right? I was watching MSNBC because you got to watch other things sometimes. Well, you got to watch everything all the time, actually. But I was watching MSNBC, and they were talking about this was Rachel Maddow's show, and she was talking about how you could get involved with these protests and stand against the Trump administration and all those things in a more aggressive but peaceful way, is what she said, right? The peaceful protest, but but it's the that's her agenda, right? She tailored her news story, right, in order to give the tools to the protesters in order to protest, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a few years, but that's what she was talking about in that show. And we see similar things, right, with the stories that they choose to emphasize and de-emphasize, right, in the MSM, in order to get a emotional response out of the viewer, because they think that their that their goals are better than just presenting things unbiasedly and fair. And that's and that includes Fox News, that includes CNN, that includes MSNBC, that includes ABC, that includes all of those major people. All have their own various agendas, and their agendas aren't often what's best for the American people. I just want to give a quick shout out because I got a text message to my brother-in-law. I'm not going to say his name. Hello, how are you? And then that'll be good. Yeah, Gavin, do you want to have anything to say about the MSM in particular to the story?
No, I don't got anything to add there.
Nothing. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I can actually continue off of what Andreas said, because you brought up a good point about the response that they're trying to evoke from the viewer. The fact that they're trying to evoke sort of an emotional response is very apparent, right? Because that's really the only way you can respond in such a way to such a situation. Like it's objectively objective. Like this was the case for one person, and this is how you responded, and something very similar happens, and without having the investigation completed, you're already starting to defend them, even though you don't really know the entire picture yet. So it gets exactly at, and I'm very happy you said that, because that's exactly what it gets at. It gets at the emotional aspect of the listener, and it gets to that issue, which in general in our society today is a very big one. The fact that people are making decisions more emotionally than objectively, more emotionally than rationally, if you will. And I think that that's not a trend that we should like or should be supporting. Gavin, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, yeah, no, I just like when you're like going back to what Andreas said earlier about like sensationalizing like the news. That's and not having that be reporting on emotion rather than what actually happened. That's just you can't tailor the news like that. I think it's the Washington Post motto. Say what you will about them, but their motto is democracy dies in darkness, and we're dying in emotional darkness right now with all of that. And I just, it's kind of scary because when you look at things like the president has confidential, like classified documents in his possession, either the former president or current one, whether or not there's a lot of them or minimal, and you can't trust the media because of they're playing to the emotions of the viewer. You lose faith in your government and the media. Um, and at that point, the political system that we have established begins to die. And that's an incredibly scary concept to me.
Well, to talk about, media corruption, right? We heard for years, right? Those 4 years about the Russia thing, right? And that was to evoke emotional response, saying that Trump, whether you like him or not, was a Russian pawn, right? And that they had evidence or whatever. And Rachel Maddow, to keep bringing her up, brought up her evidence. But then, years later, we find out that it was all fabricated and not true, right? And it's all in service of, okay, what is the agenda of the mainstream media in regards to this topic, right? And that's mainly, that's going to go back down to what do the people in charge of the MSM think is important to them, and what do they think is important for the American populace to believe and to follow. And so that's why they cover up stories like the corruption of Joe Biden, which was known before the 2020 election, right? Where there was a whole piece by, I think it was the Times, that was called Biden Inc., which explains how Joe Biden was enriching his family because of his office, right? And that all got covered up when he began to run for office, right? Where his brother was making money, I think it was in Afghanistan, in housing that Joe Biden gave him the contracts for, right? And that we saw in that video where Joe Biden speaks and he says, that there was a prosecutor that was investigating the Burisma Energy Board, and Joe Biden said, fire the prosecutor, right? And Ukraine fired the prosecutor to protect his son. So it's just a continual trend that we see of the media just saying, okay, we're going to protect the people that we like, right? Whether that be Mitch McConnell that they like, or Mitt Romney, or Joe Biden, right? They're going to protect their protected people, and they're going to do whatever they want to the unprotected group, right? And that's what's happening.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's interesting. But at the same time, I can promote something all I want. But if the truth is out there and available, like, you'd think that more people would go out and realize that everything that they're, well, not everything, but a lot of the stuff that they're hearing on the news is just not true, or it's not coming from a place of objectivity. So then why is it that, given all this information is out there, you clearly have an understanding of it somehow? It's not that you pulled it out of your big cowboy hat of a database of information or anything. You went out online and you found it. So why is it, do we think that people aren't willing to go out and find the truth and just trust whatever they hear and take it at face value?
That's not what's rewarded anymore. You're not rewarded for doing that. When you actually go out and find the truth, it's a lot darker than you want it to be. You don't feel as good looking at the real truth. The truth, this is a little known saying, but the truth hurts sometimes. And if that is what you're going to be promoting over the mass media, that's what the mass media is presenting, it's not going to get any viewership. The people that will say something that fits with someone's personal agenda, that's going to attract a crowd no matter what you do. And it boils down to like how infiltrated advertising is into everything in our society. Like doing the research for all of these things. I have an ad blocker on because I like to be able to, read the newspaper without like it going up and down several times because I had to load in a new ad. But the ads on there, like, they get rewarded. People, like the news people, will be paid for people seeing those ads. And if the ads, like if the news is something that's really centralized, like something that's really like, hey, here is your side of this issue and not the objective truth, people are going to stick on it because people want to hear something that makes them that feels not bad, but like happy or upset. And they're going to stay on that page for longer, and the news agency will get more money. And that's just one of the other things, another big problem with media, I think. What do you have to say, Andreas?
Well, how did you know I had something to say? To respond to Chris's question, where he's talking about why do we not look up and why do we not do our own research? I think it's that we're busy, right? A lot of Americans are just busy, and they don't want to spend the time or effort in order to find out what's actually going on. and to read actually the original documents, and to look and follow stories past when people forget about them, right? When you hear something once, you're like, okay, that's it, that's the whole story. I'm not going to follow up later to see how that develops and figure out what's exactly happening. And we forgot the ability to do that because our schooling system, right, to start off with, has taught us that we need to trust the authorities, right? Every single day when you're going through school, right? It's always, you're going to trust your teacher. Your teacher is not going to steer you wrong. You're going to trust the authority. And now, right, when you're back into the real world, right, the MSM becomes the authority. And so you're going to trust what they say. And then whatever agenda they have, whether that be Fox News or MSNBC, right, you're going to trust them because they're the authority that you subscribe to. And so you're not going to pay attention to the rest of the story and see, the hypocrisy that's happening in the White House because they're covering up half of it, right? Either they're covering up what Trump's doing, or they're covering up what Biden's doing, right, in order to push whatever agenda they're trying to push, right? And you're not going to say, I'm not going to be informed and figure out what's going on. Right? You're just going to say, okay, here's the authority. This is what the authority says. This agrees with my confirmation bias. So I'm going to listen and I'm going to believe that. And then I'm going to parrot that information out to everybody else. Did you see what Trump said when he did this? Did you see what Biden said when he couldn't speak, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And you're just going to parrot that, and you're not going to dig deeper into whatever the story was. To answer Gavin, the MSM, we have a secret private chat, by the way. To answer Gavin, the MSM is the mainstream media. That's what that stands for. You can also refer to it as the legacy media. They're the same synonymous terms. Legacy media and mainstream media. You've got what is it called? It's the is it Gaps Media? I forget what it's called. There's a term for Vice and what's the other one? It's Vice. I forget what it is, but there's a term for that type of media, and then there's independent content creator, which is the last one. So you've got MSM. I think it's Bridge. Is it Bridge Media? Is it? It's not. It's not, it doesn't matter. I'll have an answer for you next time. And it's just various classifications of news source is what that is. So when I say MSM or legacy media, that's your Washington Post, that's your CNN, that's your New York Times. And that's what that is.
Okay, that's fair. To what Gavin said about reading through websites, though, yes, the two most annoying things about reading something online: ads and cookies. Look, man, I'm already a sugar addict. I can't handle these cookies, man. I can't handle them. They're unhandleable. But that's a very good point that you make, Andreas, about the whole that whole issue. But that brings up a question, I guess. And the question that it would bring up would be, there are two ways that things are done in society, right? From a get things done perspective. Either you make a law that requires it to happen, or you face enough societal pressure to the point where you pretty much have to do it. Right. That's the whole thing with like CSR recently, and like meeting certain initiatives that are beneficial to the environment and to the public. So that brings up the question, given the power that the MSM has in society, should there be some sort of moral imperative placed on them to report accurately, regardless of the money that they may be receiving or the deals that they may be receiving behind the scenes? Should there be a moral imperative that we place on them as the people of the United States and of the world?
Well, they used to have journalistic ethics, right? And that they would have when they reported stuff. Right, and I can pull up that ethics list. But we've seen in the last few years, particularly since 2015, that ethics list has just collapsed on both sides of the aisle, right? Where they don't care about the journalistic ethics, and they've been doing things like the Rachel Maddow defense, right? When they end up in court, or the Tucker Carlson defense, if you're on the left, right? Where they say that their show is commentary and opinion only. So therefore they don't need to do the required research, right, in order to validate their sources, because it's opinion and nobody's going to trust them as a true and valid source. That's what they've said in court. And that's how they've gotten away from defamation cases and things like that. in court because they say, well, it's all opinion, so therefore, we're not actually reporting the news. And that's something that's been happening the last few years. Whether you want to call that the Rachel Maddow defense or the Tucker Carlson defense, that's what they bring up in court, and that's what they say, right? Rather than work on journalistic ethics and truly dig to the bottom of a story before they start reporting.
And I also feel like those ethics aren't super rewarded anymore. You're not going to get the most attention on the news. There's how many different news agencies in the world, but there's only so many that have such power as CNN or Fox News or MSNBC. You're not going to, if you're upholding those ethics, you're not going to get the news. Like, it's not what people want to hear, and you're not going to get the limelight for it. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Like, all that stuff is still out there. It's just pushed down to the bottom. It's not what people actively strive for. We're too busy for it. It's not what gives us emotion. It's not what gives us like positive or exciting emotions. It's something that makes us feel bad. And when we put in the time to look for it, we just feel worse. We feel like we wasted our time, and it's just not rewarded anymore.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And that seems to be the trend of the theme that we're discussing here tonight is emotional responses to things that don't necessarily require an emotional response, and then letting that emotional response dictate how we respond to things objectively. So I guess the question is, what do you guys think about this? So this is now your opinion. What do you think about this whole situation? What do you think you'd like to see happen? What do you think we can set and plant as a seed to start changing these trends? Because these trends are not the trends that occur in a society that's on pace to be thriving, in my opinion, at least.
Well, I think that the big thing that you can do, right, you, the listener at home, and we, the people that have started this interesting podcast that we started, is that we actually have to do the research, right? We can't trust what we read online at face value because it might not be true. It might be a half truth, right? I was listening to Tim Pool, right? I occasionally listen to him when I have time. I don't have that much time to do that all the time, but he always brings up the example of of these news stories and fact checking of these news stories. Well, they say that everybody's reporting online that Trump licked an ice cream cone. And then the journalists will say, well, did Trump lick an ice cream cone and then do a backflip? And then they'll say, no, that's a fake news story. He did not lick an ice cream cone and do a backflip. That has nothing to do with the story that was actually occurring, right? Where Trump was licking the ice cream cone in order to make sure that they can say that the story is false, right? And then ignore reporting on it, ignore bringing it up. So really, it's got to be up to you guys, the listener, in order to see and dig into, what the story is. Let's see here. We got some chats here in the YouTube from our good friend over there, Jesse.
I was just about to say.
Do we want to bring that up and discuss it here?
Yeah, sure. Why not? So this is the first thing that Jesse posted. If you're not watching this live and you're watching this or listening to this post recorded, then this is what Jesse said. So Jesse, by the way, is one of our good buddies. We told him he should drop in on the stream, and he is. Shout out, Jesse. I hope you made your flight. Last I checked, he was supposed to fly out to see family in California as of this morning. I don't know if he made it. He said his flight was delayed. Hopefully you did. But this is what he says. So he says sensory gating, quote unquote, or our RAS system describes our neural processes of filtering out redundant or irrelevant stimuli from all possible environmental stimuli. So we are targeted based on our left or right views. Thoughts?
That's true, right? We think that a lot of the news, right, from the other side is fake just on the face of it, right? Because of our biases and our inability, right, to just notice what the other side is saying, because we think it's not helpful to us, and and we immediately think it's not true, and that it's redundant or irrelevant, just like Jesse's saying. So that's something that we gotta watch out for and see, okay, what is the gaps that I'm missing, right? And just realize that you have gaps when you're doing your own independent study and independent reading of the news story, right? So there's that. So for example, if we were to bring it back to our topic of the evening, our first topic of the evening, with this hypocrisy in the White House, right? You've got now people on the left side of the aisle bending over backward to justify Biden's storage of these documents, you know, and trying to justify away the rationale for persecuting Trump for the same activity. So you see that you're cutting out information in order to justify yourself and remove, what you don't want to see, right? It's just what it is.
And
Yeah, that's
like
a good
to
point.
add on to that, it's just like you need to be acknowledging that the fact that these news articles were written in the first place is indicative that something happened somewhere. News articles they don't just spawn out of nowhere. Like when you're doing that research, take every news article into account. Like even if it's from the other side of the aisle, like acknowledge all the parts of it and use that news article into your research from the other side of the article. Um, like if you're on the left and justifying Biden holding these documents, well, look at the right who did the same thing and how you felt of them doing it. Fill in that gap within your information. Try and tie a more cohesive story.
Yeah, those are both good points, and I think that gets at what I was going to say actually, is that we need to be more consistently critical. We need to realize that when we read a news article, when we read it, there's the bias of the person who wrote the article, and then there's our own personal bias. So we need to do our best to fight through both of those biases to get to the truth of the situation. And as Christians, especially for us, it's particularly important as Christians that we get to the bottom of what's true and what's not. The Bible talks many times about people trying to promote ideas that are not true. Now, obviously, most of the time that's within the context of the church. So there will be people who try and introduce deceptive, like theologic ideas and heresies. But that translates into society as well, especially for us as the church. We're supposed to be the ones who set the standard for our beliefs, for who God is, who provides us with objective truth. So we need to do a better job of making sure that we get to the bottom of the truth and encourage others to do so as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't get to the bottom of the truth, how are you able to communicate and talk about it in society and able to do that, right? You can't, if you have a half story, how are you supposed to say, okay, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to explain to my friends or whatever why I'm going to do this thing based on a half piece of information, right? You can't do that, right? It's just not it's not it's not a good way to move forward, right? If you're going to say, okay, I saw this news story, so now I'm going to buy, a million Dogecoin, right? Just as an example. Well, you're operating on something that might not be true, and then you're telling other people, and it just doesn't look good, right? And you need to be able to say, okay, I'm going to understand this story. I'm going to be able to communicate what's happening. I'm going to know what they're not talking about, what they're choosing to talk about. And I'm going to be able to apply, that biblical worldview to that story and be able to share that with other people. Because otherwise, why? If you if you're half seeing the truth, half seeing with the story, why are you talking about it with somebody else if you can't process that initial information and then spread it in a biblical worldview, right? We're supposed to be, you know, we're supposed to show God's love through all situations and show the truth. And if we can't, we're just neglecting our responsibility if we're almost gossiping, right, when it comes to the news stories,
Mm.
right? In a theology class I took back in the day, they said that um, if you're not a part of the solution, or it's not your original problem, then you shouldn't be talking about it because it's gossip, right? So when you're talking about these news stories, right, if you're not a part of the solution or you're not initially a part of the problem, then why are you talking about it if you can't be a part of that solution, right? Otherwise you're just gossiping about what you saw in the news.
Mm.
And that's not something that most people don't think about. I think I said that clearly.
I think so. We'll run back the tape later to make sure, but makes sense. Quick shout out to Jesse, by the way. He is in TSA. He's working on it. It's a hard thing to do these days, but he's getting there. So shout out to him tuning in to the show from the airport on his way to see his fam. But Gavin, I do have a question for you actually, because you're kind of the baby Christian in relation to the three of us on this podcast. In your opinion, how do you think the church is doing at promoting the spread of truth in all areas, whether it be faith, whether it be politics, to society as a whole?
Oh boy, don't even get me started.
I'm getting you started.
So yeah, I don't think they're doing a good job. I think they kind of fall into that same kind of like they have an agenda behind everything. As we'll get to talking about in the next episode tonight. But it just like I feel like most people don't really know what the church is really about anymore. And it also might just because of the bias that my family holds, and the news that we tend to watch because of it. Because as Chris mentioned, I am a baby Christian. I got baptized over the summer. And before that, I couldn't even see myself in a church. But that's because what I saw of the church, like I grew up living next to one of the most prominent churches in the Centennial region in southern Denver. And all I ever saw from them was the church bells. That's all I ever saw. So all that I got was really bad parts of the church, like abuses of the church, whether monetary, sexually, or just spreading not necessarily wrong information, but like pinpointing it on just one point rather than like expressing the full message of the gospel, like focusing on one specific issue, spoilers, abortion, or like LGBT rights, or prayers in the classroom. I kind of feel like the church isn't really doing a good job, and it's kind of indicative of other parts of our society too. I don't know which started it first, the church or the news, but either way, both aren't really conveying what the truth of the story is, and rather just promoting kind of a sensationalism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. In my opinion, I think it probably starts from the church because, like I said, we are the ones who kind of set the precedent as those world changers that Jesus wanted us to go out and be, to make disciples, right? So, in a sense, we can look at society and say, based on how impactful or unimpactful we are being, we can see that reflected in society and the trends that we see in society, right? So, I mean, Andreas, you got anything else to add to that?
No, I'm good. I'm
No,
good.
fair enough. Well, I guess then we can begin the conclusion part of our episode here. So, in response, to tie it back to the original issue of hypocrisy with the Biden administration as of recently and the mainstream media, how can we respond when we understand that our leaders or someone in our life is not quite being consistent across the board?
I think we kind of just touched on it earlier. Just really going in to do your research on your news. Don't just read the one, or don't read the one head. Just don't get your information from headlines. Read the article, but also go to another news source about that article. Go across the aisle to hear about what they're saying, and take all of that information into account and draw the common ground in between them. If there's something that doesn't make sense from that common ground, go and try and do research to fill it in. Make time to learn about what's happening within our government. Make time to understand what's happening in the world, what's happening in politics and the news and all that such.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say that getting back to the original source is probably always your best option when you're interpreting the news, right? Because that's really what you're doing. You're interpreting what you see in the news, and then you're broadcasting that out. And if you're looking through somebody else's glasses when you're looking at the news, you're going to automatically be tilted to their way and method of thinking, because they've skewed the news, right? And they've put on whatever colored glasses that they want to put on to the news story. And that's all you're going to see unless you actually dig down and you find whatever the original documents are, and understand what actually happened from a factual standpoint before you go and begin the commentary of what actually happened, right? Because we could have spent this story talking about, just what Joe Biden did and all that other stuff, but you know understanding the sources, I think, is more important than sensationalizing the news story and say, oh, look what he did in comparison to Trump, right? But really digging down and seeing what the sources are, and being able to discuss, oh, this source does this thing, this does this thing, can help your conversations and help you explain your positions and your thoughts from a biblical worldview.
Gavin said something very interesting. He said, make time to understand the articles that you're reading. I'm going to expand on that a little bit more, actually. So I'm going to say either make time to fully understand the articles that you're reading, or judge the articles that you read and the headlines that you read appropriately. Because what we can't have in a society that we want to thrive is a bunch of people going out, reading a headline, automatically just defaulting to their own bias and approaching it from that perspective, regardless of whether it's true or not. Like, that just can't happen in a society that we want to thrive and to function to its maximum potential. So just either make time to read the article fully and develop your opinion based on that. Or if you're just going to read the little headline, judge accordingly. Whatever emotion that evokes in you when you read the headline, judge accordingly and say, okay, this may be the entire picture. This may be all I need, or it may not be what I need. And if it's not what I need, I do not want to look silly. So I think it's very important that we approach that and the news from that perspective. But also, it's important to understand who we support. It's important to understand how the different aspects of our society function. It's important to understand who the mainstream media is supporting, and as such, how that's going to impact the news that we see, the news that is promoted to us, the news that we have to dig a little bit deeper to find. It's going to affect a lot of the aspects of our reality and understanding our society and our country. So there's that. And also, I guess the last point that I'll leave us with is, don't compromise personality for productivity. It's very easy for us to side with people that we like as a person, regardless of whether what they're doing is productive or truthful or not. Don't compromise on that. Don't compromise on the truth just because you like someone. Because like we mentioned on the Andrew Tate episode last week, people are temporary. People are fickle. Like, we're imperfect. There's no reason to lay everything on the line for any person who's not named Jesus Christ, right? So that's an important takeaway that we can get from that as well. But with that said, I think we can end this episode here, because it sounds like the next episode is one that we have a lot more detail and time to talk on. So we'll leave a little bit more time to talk about this. This was a good episode, though. We got some good discussion on the issue of hypocrisy and mainstream media, and how we can approach reading the news that comes across our feed on a regular basis, and as such, be better contributors to society is what I'm going to say. Any other closing thoughts on this episode, gentlemen?
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share this video with other people. I thought there were some valuable things said that I said, right? My arrogance and egotism, right? Saying that I think I said some cool things. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that'd be great. We'll be live again in 20 minutes. Maybe sooner, to discuss Dobbs. That's going to be a much deeper discussion. I'm interested to see what Gavin's opinions are as a baby Christian, and we're going to go through that in 20 minutes. Excited to see you guys then.
Peace.
Andreas is speaking the truth. He's not being egotistical. He's well informed and good. Don't say you're egotistical. Okay, we'll see y'all on the next one.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so you're only interested to hear Gavin's opinion and not mine? Okay, I see how it is. I got you. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But
See,
anyways,
yeah.
if you're watching this or listening to this post-recorded, man, you don't want to miss it. We have so much fun on these lives. And like Jesse did this fine evening and episode, contributing is a huge part of what we want to make this show. So we want listener involvement to be a thing that drives our conversation when applicable. So always, if you're able to, we encourage you to hop into the live, interact with us, and all that good stuff. But anyways, we will see you on the next episode. If you're listening to this post-recorded, go find that next episode. It's going to be a really good one, I have a feeling. But anyways, until that next episode, peace.
So